Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. I've recently been in contact with two ladies who live in the northeast of England, on old mining land, and they've had encounters with what is now commonly called a dogman or a wolfman, a creature that seems to be part human, part canine. Living anywhere else in the world, these encounters would be seen as attacks, and yet in both of these situations, both ladies encountered something that did not want to harm them, and in one case actually warned one lady not to come any closer. Both witnesses have never met before, and both of the reports were taken before I introduced them to each other. Now there's a similarity between the events and the ladies themselves. Both ladies struggle with a disability, and they were both walking their dogs when the event took place, and as a crow flies, they're about 20 minutes apart. This leads me to wonder if they both had interactions with the same being. Stu Hill, who is a long-term investigator for BBR, had his own experience with a dog-like creature in the Simonside Hills in August of 2020. I'm beginning to wonder why the sudden increase in reports in the northeast of England and all across the UK. It seems that they've been coming in steadily since 2020. As we know, the area is known for many paranormal, cryptid and UFO reports. These cases run from Yorkshire in the south all the way through to Northumberland, reaching to the Scottish borders, where I also have dogman and werewolf cases. I've asked Stu to investigate these cases for me, as he's local and he has a good knowledge of the area. And I'll bring you any updates as Stu investigates. For now, let's look at the cases and see what similarities we can pick up on. Our first case tonight came to me over the New Year period, and I've spoken with a witness at length. Thanks to her knowledge of animals and a keen sense for detail, she was able to supply us with lots of information. Her name's Bella Titini, and she said, I live in an area in northeast of England that's inland from the coast. I was born in Yorkshire, but I lived in the northeast for many, many years, and I know the area well. I was born with a degenerative eye condition, so over the years I've lost more and more of my sight. I can now only see objects or things in my peripheral vision. I have a small dog who I adore, and she's also my assistance dog, and I'd be lost without her. Between us, we walk many miles enjoying nature and the amazing walks in the area. I'm an artist, and I can still take in the beautiful colours and all of the nature around me. In 2021, in October, I had an experience I've kept to myself, as I didn't know who to turn to that might understand what happened to me that day. I know you've had weird experiences of your own, Deb, and you've worked with many others who also have had puzzling events in their life. So I'm hoping by contacting you, I can share what happened and add to the data that you're compiling. I'd been into town on that day. I'd met up with a group of friends and I'd missed my bus home. It was about 6:30 p.m. and dark, so I took an alternative bus than normal, which dropped me close to home, but I still had a walk to do in the dark. However, it's an area I like walking in, and it gave my little dog a walk before we got home. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at any point, and it's a walk I've done many times before. The dog was fine. There are some farmers' fields and wooded areas along the walk, and then you come to an area that dips down. The area is lit. There's some street lighting, so, I wasn't afraid to walk there. There's a small stream that runs through here, and after my encounter, I wondered if this was important somehow. The stream runs through an area that's a choke point, and if you wanted to bypass the homes in the area, this is the best route to take. And you often hear of creatures that are seen close to waterways. As I explained earlier, I struggle with my sight, especially in the dark, as I only see movement or shadows in my peripheral vision. I can see out in front of me by about a foot in length. Like most of the UK, we have trouble here with kids on electric scooters and e-bikes that come charging at me, with no sound or warning. Luckily, my dog usually gives me a warning before this happens, so I can get to the side of the path and let them pass. So when I saw a movement under the second lamppost away from me, I knew it was something large, and the movement was unusual. and I think that's what caught my attention initially. It was like a dark smudge moving in the darkness of the night. I couldn't really process what it was as a large dark shape came barreling towards me in the darkness. So I expected a large person on a silent scooter or an electric bike to come crashing into me, and wondering why the dog didn't react at all. With my vision, I saw only a large dark shape moving at speed in my direction. So much so, I said loudly, "Stop! You're going to hit me!" And it did stop, about a foot in front of me. And it was not a yobbo on a silent scooter. In fact, I was faced with a hairy torso of some athletic-looking being, and he stopped right in front of me. He covered the distance between us in a second, and I was shocked at just how fast he moved. Weirdly, through this whole event, the dog did not react. She just stayed still and silent the whole time. Thinking back on the event today, I realised that there was no bird sound that night. In fact, there were no sounds at all. If I hadn't seen the movement of a black mass, I would have missed it completely. But there I was, a foot from an incredible creature, and I wasn't scared. I kept my head facing his torso, and I slowly tried to look up to take in more of his appearance. His hair, and I stress hair as it was not fur, was well kept. I know this as I used to work with animals. His skin beneath the hair was dark, almost like charcoal. He looked healthy and in his prime. Not huge like a weightlifter, but clearly well muscled and fit. Even I could define his muscles, and his hair was longer around his head, his neck and his shoulders. I would say that it was black, or at least very dark brown, and it formed a long V on his chest as the hair became sparser on his midriff. If it wasn't for the lighting, I don't think I would have seen him at all. It was only by the light of the lamps that I could make anything out. I remember clearly taking in every detail that I could as I was trying to process what was standing in front of me. I knew I was looking at something not human, for all I could see hair and muscle. I'm 5'2", and I was only as tall as his torso. In fact, I was eye level with his navel, which you could see clearly. I estimate he was between 7 and 8 feet tall. I saw no breasts or nipples, and I felt that this being was male. The hair on his body was quite long, being around several inches in length. I never thought to look down at his legs, and naturally looked up at him. And as I started to do this, I could see pec muscles of his neck. His neck was thickly muscled. I knew I was looking at a creature, and at that point, he started to bend down towards me. He looked me dead in the eye, and his eyes were yellow and seemed to be illuminated from within. The eyes had golden flecks within that yellow, and they resembled glowing round orbs, but human-shaped, not like the eyes of an animal. I also noticed no smell. I could feel his breath on me, but it wasn't horrible, as I've heard people describe it before. It was just a natural animal smell, like horses or dogs. They have their own scent, but it isn't rank or rancid. He looked well groomed, and his hair had a gentle sway to it in the breeze. I'm not sure if I said this out loud, or if I screamed it in my head, but I said, "I see you. I know what you are. I wish you no harm, and I'm no threat." I was literally willing him to go away the whole time he was looking at me. He didn't show any aggression, didn't growl or show his teeth at all. And then he did the strangest thing. I'm convinced that he smirked at me. His expression changed. I could see it in his eyes, and his lip curled ever so slightly. Like when a rescue dog softens towards you, it knows that you have no bad intent. And at that point, he's only 6 inches from me, and I could feel him breathing on my face. It was warm, slightly moist. His head was huge, with his eyes on the front of his head. His muzzle was not like a German Shepherd dog. It was shorter, and the hair there was sparse, more like the Mexican hairless dog. He had 2 arms and 2 legs, and even when he was coming towards me in the dark, he wasn't low down. He was upright and running on 2 legs. He just looked at me, as I looked at him. And then with 2 steps, he covered a distance of about 10 feet and was gone into the tree line, and I saw no tail. Looking back, I think he'd come from the river, and he was using the green corridor to skirt the houses. Once he was out of the woodland, it was just old mining land with farms, fields and pockets of woodland with a small stream, and I think that was important. I think this was maybe the route he was taking. During all of this, my dog did not make a movement or sound. She stayed calm. I don't think she sensed danger, as she would have been very vocal and warned me if she had. She didn't cover her belly or show any fear. I wouldn't describe him as a monster or something evil. In fact, I felt like he was a sentient being of some kind. And I think we accidentally met that day. I caught my breath for a second and just went home. And I've been puzzled about this ever since. I've tried to explain it away, and I can't. I know what I encountered that day on my walk home. He was a being of some kind, like a man and an animal combined together, like a lichen of old. That must have been really moving for Bella. There are other reports in the area, and one of those reports comes from quite close by, and it involved 3 separate witnesses who each saw the same thing. The first witness name was Ben, and Ben described seeing a large, dark, human-like shape that was standing about 50 to 60 yards away from him, and he describes the figure as about 7 feet in height. He was in Clevedon, and he said after watching the figure for around a minute, the figure then changed instantly, and it became a large, black, muscular horse. Ben described it as changing so fast that, in his words, I didn't see it change from the figure to the horse properly. 1 minute, it was a large, human-like figure. The next, it was a large black horse. Ben stated that he and the others watched this large horse-like figure for what seemed like minutes as it watched them. Witness 2, James, also described the figure, in his words, a tall, human-like figure that was standing about 7 feet tall. It also seemed to have a pointed head, similar to having a hoodie or a hood up. James continued to report that he could see an arm on the figure from his vantage point, but Ben and Ashley did not. He also reported that he watched the figure for a minute or so. Then it changed instantly into a large, black, muscular dog. This happened quickly, so quickly that he couldn't see it change, and he actually described it as almost shook-like. The third was Ashley, and Ashley described seeing a human-like figure, just as Ben and James did, and she described it as a tall, dark, human-like figure. She watched it for a minute. She then stated that the figure changed into a large, black horse or a minotaur of some kind. She even described seeing horn-like shapes on the top of its head. And from that point on, none of them said a word, and they just got to the path that leads to Sunderland Road. And after crossing Sunderland Road and carrying up the path towards Harton Nook, Ashley stated that they turned around because Ben had seen something on the path up ahead of them. But like James, she didn't see anything. Just up the road from where those 3 people were, there are 2 further reports of a creature that locals have called the Geet. The first case took place in 2002-2003, when a man, walking home after dropping his girlfriend off and hurrying down the lane to catch the last bus, was caught out as he really needed a pee. He went to the bushes at the side of the lane and began his call of nature. And as he did this, a terrifying creature shot out of the bushes and confronted him. He said, "The bushes opened up in front of me. They just parted, and this massive, skinny, hairy thing came lunging out at me. I jumped back. I remember screaming in shock because it was so tall and hairy. I can only describe it as looking like Chewbacca from Star Wars, but thinner. He scared me witless. I turned and ran quicker than I'd ever ran before, and I could hear its thuds behind me for maybe 10 metres. It clearly did not want me there. It didn't stop. It just came after me, and I didn't stop to look back. My feet didn't touch the deck. I was running for my life, I thought. I can honestly say I would have beaten Linford Christie at that moment in time. I never stopped until I got home. which was next to the army camp. I did tell people over and over. I never shut up about it for weeks, but nobody ever believed me. In October of 2003, a man who went to local shops to buy a bottle of wine for dinner also saw a strange, hairy human figure in the Cleedon area. He said the night was dark, so it's hard to tell exactly the description of the creature. However, it appeared to have a thick fur coat. I estimate that it was around 50 yards from me when I saw it. It walked along the edge of the tree line before it was startled and ran back into the trees. It was solidly built, with what looked like a thick fur coat on. So Bella's not alone when it comes to seeing an unknown creature. And it was a strange serendipity that Bella found her way to me. Just 3 weeks prior, I'd spoken to a lady who had her own experience with a beast that warned her not to see him when she was out walking her dog on the same mining land, less than 20 minutes away from where Bella lives as the crow flies. Tracy contacted me in late December 2023, and she'd had an experience in Pontyland in the northeast of England. Here's her account as it was transcribed from one of our phone calls. Tracy's well used to animals and nature. They've been her lifelong companions. She's used to the outdoors. She's a real northern lass and not one for stories. For all she played down this experience, I do think it had a profound effect on her, and I can understand why. And she said, "Hi Deb, I wanted to get in touch with you as I had a really strange experience when I was out walking my dog. I live in Pontyland in the northeast of England, and it's a lovely area with lots of walks. I was out with my dog one night when all this happened. It was in the summer, 2023, and we were in the park. It was raining, so I didn't see any other people walking their dogs or out in the park at all. We were not in the middle of nowhere or in a huge forest. In fact, I was on a path with about 2 feet of hardly any cover to the side of me that got thicker as it met the tree line. And I think I confronted a dogman. I didn't see it, but I heard it. And when I heard it, I also felt it. There was a resonance to it. You could feel the sound it made as well as hear it. I consider myself empathic, and I can struggle with other people's energy at times. And I think this is why I tuned into him. I'm the type of person that can go into a room and become overwhelmed by all of the energy. Or I can meet a person and know instantly whether I like them or not. I would also consider myself well grounded and not used to flights of fancy. I love the outdoors, nature and animals. I'm not the type of lass that scares easily. My little dog had recently passed away, and that's been really hard on me, as you can imagine. He was 16 and still enjoying his walks, and I'd taken him out later in the evening as it was much cooler after the sun had gone down. Poor old chap had trouble seeing as he had cataracts, and he's either selectively hard of hearing or his hearing was going due to his age, but he could always hear a packet of treats open. He was a little Wester, and his sense of smell was still amazing, so walking with him in the dark was not a problem. He could hardly see or hear, but we'd go up that little park and he'd be sniffing as we did our usual route. The River Pont runs close to the park. It's a small setting on the edge of the greenbelt land. That night, everything was normal. But as we were walking, I felt a feeling that made me want to be physically sick. It came on really quickly, and it was overwhelming. Trying to rationalise it and the noise that it made, I thought that maybe what I heard was just a huge dog that was off its lead and was in the tree line, and I just couldn't see it. I actually thought, "My, you're a big bugger, and why would someone leave you out in the rain?" I was concerned for the dog. I would say concern was my first thought. The growl it gave out was low and drawn out, a rumbling growl that a big dog would make. I felt for that poor thing. No wonder it growled. It was probably scared to death, out in the rain, in the dark like that. My dog didn't react. I felt that growl, but my dog didn't do anything. Then I was worried about my dog. I was torn between helping this poor stray or keeping my dog safe. I know I can swear like a pirate, and I swore a lot in my head at that moment, My main thought was, without thinking, I stepped forwards towards it in concern for my little fella. Within 2 steps, that growl came again. But this time it was different. Really different. It had 2 tones in it. The only way I can describe it is I once heard Tibetan throat gargling, kind of singing, and that was close to the noise that this dog was making. I don't know of any dogs that have 2 pitches to their growl. And then it growled like that again. And when that happened, I heard something in my head. It took a split second for me to get myself together. This thing said, "You don't want to see me." Now, cough kind of thing. It didn't speak out loud, but I heard it. I turned immediately to my dog and I said out loud, "Come on, I don't think we're wanted here." In my head, I was explaining that we'd got its message, we meant it no harm, and that it better not upset my dog as we were walking off. I just pondered on this for days, what had gone on. Myself and the dog were stuck in for a few days as it was raining so hard. I went through every possible explanation I could think of to explain this away. I wondered if I'd hallucinated or had mistaken a situation, and I was determined not to think about it. When we finally headed back to the park, my dog was normal as usual. He didn't seem scared or afraid at all. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to go looking in that spot as we were walking. Remember, those growls made me feel sick in my throat, but really curious at the same time. But I did go back to that area, and there was a lot of flattened grass, like something had been laying there. Now, I don't know what we have in the UK that would be that big. Of course, we'd have to rule out a human doing this, but I couldn't see why they would, and I don't think they'd be able to replicate that growl. And if this creature was lying there, why would it be in a setting like this, just off a path where people walk their dogs every day? But when you look at the area, it's on a country lane with lots of woodlands and fields. The River Pont runs through there. And I remember thinking to myself, what if it was a huge animal, like a Jersey cow, But when a cow lies down on the grass, it's a particular shape that it leaves on the ground. This was different. This looked like an oval shape, and you could see what looked like an area a dog would have bedded down in. It looked exactly like when your dog, when he circles on the bed before lying down. Even in the dark, a creature this size should have been visible to me. I know it was dark and there were shrubs and bushes, but I should have been able to see it. And that's puzzled me ever since. Can these creatures be invisible, even when you're really close to them? I didn't feel like that creature was there for me. I just think it happened to be in the wrong place and the wrong time for both of us. Is something to do with the land here, maybe? Is there something different about the energy? I suppose I'm wondering why he'd be here. Let's look at some of the reports that are close to this area as well, because not too far away, we have the famous Bollum Lake creature that has chased several people out of the woodlands around Bollard Lake. And there's a very strange case where a knacker had to pick up a dead bullock from one farmer and nobody could identify what killed it, as only the liver was taken and nothing had predated on the carcass. I have one case among many in the Stanley concert area, where in 2019, a woman was saved from a man who was following her by a creature that was using the bushes to hide. This area is directly below Tracy. The lady in this case said, "I'd been into town for the day, and on my way back home I was reluctant to walk that way for some unknown reason, but I decided to go against my gut feeling and headed up the line to my walk. My music was loud and my headphones in. I couldn't hear anyone behind me. And there's this part of the line where I always feel uncomfortable, and I tend to walk really fast through that part of the woods. And as I was approaching that section, I heard a very loud knock. Loud enough that I heard it above the music and above my headphones. I stopped in my tracks, took my headphones out quick and turned around. And I realised there was a man and he was right behind me. I hadn't heard him coming, and he didn't make himself known. Well, not that I was aware of. He also heard this knock, as he seemed startled, and he was looking around to see where the noise was coming from, and it shook him up enough that he quickly moved past me, picked up pace, and was off down that walk. When this lady shared her experience with me, I asked her if she thought the wood knock had moved the man on, and she said that she did. And within moments of him leaving, she looked back up to where the knocks had come from, and she saw two hairy legs that were showing at the bottom of some thick foliage. Whilst checking newspaper reports for anything that may be connected to Tracy's sighting report in Ponteland, I realised less than a few months earlier, a lady walking a dog in the park was attacked by a predatory male. On the 15th of January 2023, an investigation was started after a woman was attacked in Ponteland Park. The poor lady in question told police she was grabbed by an unknown man who put both of his arms around her chest. It's believed the offender then left the area, heading in the direction of Darras Hall. The incident was immediately reported to Northumbria Police and an investigation was launched. Officers have already spoken to a number of people and reviewed CCTV of the area. The victim said she'd then managed to kick the offender and fled. The man is described as a white male, average height, large build, and was wearing a black beanie hat with black gloves and a black snood or scarf up to his nose. He was also wearing dark trousers and a dark jacket. Now, this may have no connection at all, but I felt it was worth mentioning. That man was not there to walk his dog. He disguised his features. He wore dark clothing to blend into the darkness of the night. He was clearly a predator of some kind. Was he still lurking when Tracy was also alone in the park that night? Did her experience save her from something far worse? We could look at this in several ways, and as I say, this is merely conjecture on my part. But I would like to look into this angle a little further in my research. It raises the question, are some of these creatures that are reported there to protect rather than attack? Do you remember the Scottish case I covered, where a dogman named Wolfie scared off a predatory male that was stalking our witness? In fact, Wolfie was so intent on helping her to be safe, he took to sitting on a doorstep of her home at night, curled up like a huge wolf dog. And neighbours saw it. He helped her on several occasions when she was extremely scared. He stopped a large dog from turning on her, and he sent her boyfriend out into the night after her when a predatory male was waiting for her in the darkness. We have heard this set of particular circumstances before. A situation with a single female who is out walking her dog when she sees or experiences a creature that doesn't show or display any anger, any aggression or rage. It happened with Polly, who's another witness. She's from the Midlands, and she was out walking her dog one night in Stableford. The creature she saw was so big, she at first thought it was a shire horse, standing behind a thick tree trunk. Her first thoughts were concern. She didn't want the horse to get hurt in the road or injured in any way. Polly stopped her car, put her headlights on it with the intention of getting out of the car, reining it in, and then contacting the police, who probably know the local farmer. So when the creature stepped from behind the tree, Polly was shocked to see a thickly muscled, two-legged being that walked past her car and carried on over to the other side of the lane. Polly contacted me as she'd heard a podcast I did where I shared two of my cases from the Staffordshire area. In the podcast, I spoke about people seeing cryptids near water, and that I felt this connection could possibly be that the creatures use our waterways to get around, and that struck a chord with Polly. It also did with Bella and Tracy. They picked up on that too. Polly reached out to me last year to share her experience, and I'd like to go over Polly's witness statement, and I hope you'll see the similarities that I see. It may give us a clue to why these creatures are appearing so often, and why these areas they're appearing in may be important to them. Polly said, two of the reports you mentioned on your podcast took place really close to where I had my experience, and I'm struggling to explain that. And what I found even more uncanny was the fact that you talked about cryptids using the waterways to move around unseen. That is very similar to what happened to me. My first encounter was right by some rural traffic lights used to slow single file traffic as you drive over a section of the River Wharfe. I didn't realise there was a brook or a stream there until after the event. I was visiting a relative and I moved between the home I was staying at and their place. I'm not a morning person, so I'd visit evenings instead. Plus, this summer was beautiful that year and I love to walk in nature. I find it soothing. And up until this happened, I've never really given much thought to the places I walk. My dog looks after me and I generally listen to my gut instinct. It's only afterwards, when you see the sheer size and power of these things, that you suddenly become hyper aware of your surroundings at all times. That's never going to go away for me. I'd visited my relative. I took my dog for a walk at 1 a.m. It was so hot that day. And I'd been for several days prior. It was really hot. So it was much cooler to walk him at night. I'm on the B road. In the daytime, it can get real busy. It's the main road in the area. But in the early hours, you see very little traffic. And that's when I used to love to be out and about. But not anymore. The road is like many rural roads in the UK. It isn't lit at night, and it winds around corners through fields and woodlands. There are small streams and brooks, and there's a small bridge you have to use where the traffic lights are situated. It was still really warm. I had the windows of the car partially down to help with the breeze for me and the dog. As I came around the last bend, I slowed down as the lights were green and had been for quite some time. I was feeling really spooked, and I had felt the same way each time I'd waited here, as I often visited my relative every night for weeks. So I was hoping if I went slow enough, the lights wouldn't be on red still by the time I reached them. Sometimes it takes a long time for the lights to change. I was also putting up some of the windows of the car due to that spooky feeling. As I came around that sweeping bend, which takes you past the woodlands, I looked and I could see something standing there. And I thought to myself, that's a shire horse, due to its sheer size and bulk. And it walked straight out into the road. Because it was really big and tall, I just assumed that it was a very, very big, valuable animal that had escaped from a private residence somewhere, and maybe the owners were not aware. I'm used to animals and horses, so I stopped, turned my lights down on full beam so I didn't spook it. I reversed my car to get a better look at it, as I couldn't work out what sort of animal it was, other than a huge horse. My first thought was that I needed to help this animal so it wasn't stuck. It wasn't hitting the road by ongoing car or, get spooked, break its leg. I was going to phone the police or the highways and report it until they came. I sincerely wish I hadn't stopped and seen what I did. And I doubt that I would have been having any further encounters if I hadn't stopped. And I realised there was no way I was phoning the police after I got a better look at it. As it crossed the road, I noticed I couldn't see the back end of the horse or its back legs. So I looked closely, and I looked at a big hump back, like on a horse's neck, and I could see elongated face and a snout, and it did have ears up on its head, but it was standing up on two legs. So at that point, my brain scanned all the animals I could think of that it might be that stood upright. It had kind of bent legs, fur and ears on its head. Kangaroo? Then I thought, why didn't it bounce or bob as it moved? Because kangaroos have a distinct way of moving, and this didn't move like that at all. It crossed the road with a normal gait and went off into the greenery on the other side. And at this point, I'm still thinking this is just an animal that I couldn't identify. I knew that if I left it alone out there, it might come to harm. And because there were no other cars on that lane, I chanced reversing the car to see if I could keep an eye on it. I was convinced I could see this horse and that, it was just limbs were hidden by a tree. As I seen it, I realised that this gnarly tree was a chest and thick branches that I was seeing were arms and legs. It had defined muscle. You could see its pecs, like a man who works out, but much bigger. It had the build of a strong muscle man like Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day. It had a very ripped chest and the muscle there was very clear. It had hair and visible skin. To be honest, at that point, I knew it wasn't a horse, and I thought, oh shit, and that's when it moved. At this point, I didn't look up its body any further. I just put the car into first gear and I drove forward. I can't tell you why I did that. It just happened. I don't even remember checking to see what colour the traffic lights were. All I could think about at that point was getting out of there as best and as fast as I could. There was no other cars out there or lights of any kind. I was in a panic and pushing any button I could lay my fingers on in the car, trying to shut all the windows at once. I was so shaken up, I just couldn't get them to work properly. All the while trying to pull myself together and drive out of there. I just could not work out what this was. I think it was the shock of not being able to see that it wasn't a horse. I wasn't scared until I realised that. Any animal I came across just doesn't fit the description. I've seen a large black cat, and even that didn't fit its size or bulk or description in any way or the way it moved. It was not moving like a cat. It wasn't feline in any way. It didn't cross my mind to look in the rearview mirror to see if it was following me. Probably because my head, I was gone. I was so scared. I was thinking it was trying to climb in the window and get me. I didn't look back. I floored it, and I just concentrated on getting home. I didn't sleep a wink that night at any point, and it just played in my head, and I couldn't stop it. And for days afterwards, I felt like I could feel it. I felt like I was being watched. I was so afraid I changed my whole routine. I didn't want it to know where I was. And the idea of sitting at those traffic lights filled me with dread all the time. Polly went on to have other experiences. One was just 6 days later in a local park, in a similar situation to Tracy. Once again, she was walking a dog when it happened, but on this occasion, it shook a large trio. Now, I've covered this case in depth, and you can find it in a link in the description below. There was also a small river mentioned in Polly's case. In fact, the River Wharfe, it flowed under the bridge where Polly's car was. It was only because of a set of temporary traffic lights that she'd stopped there that night. Doing the same drive for the last week, she had felt some trepidation on approaching this area, but she couldn't say why. The land in all three cases is very similar. Greenbelt land, lots of farm fields, woodlands, small water courses. Not only is the land similar, but these ladies were all out walking their dogs in areas that they felt comfortable in. And although the creatures seen and experienced were way beyond our scope of understanding, the behaviour does not fit with what mainstream research will have you believe. Tracy could easily have been attacked. She was alone, in the dark, in a semi-lit park, with just a little dog for company. Yet she received a warning not to come any closer. Bella was also unharmed. That creature was less than 6 inches from her, but it seemed interested in her. Curious, perhaps, but he bounded away, leaving her unscathed. She, too, was in a vulnerable position. She was out on her own with a small dog for company, in the dark, when she saw the wolfman. Yet Bella walked home safely after the incident. For Tracy, it gave her a warning. Not really the act of a predator. All of these ladies will have trauma from these events, but I think that is completely understandable, considering they all saw something that is not supposed to exist. That trauma has to be worked on like anything else in life. There is no magic button, no quick fix online. I know Polly's still struggling with her experience, and I speak to ladies every week in similar positions here in the UK and all across the world. And it isn't just females this happens to, it happens to men as well. It's just tonight's episode was about females because the cases are coming so close together. And I wanted to give an understanding of some of the clues that we are picking up on with these creatures. We know that they stick to the waterways, and for all it's subjective why they do that, it could be it's a flesh and blood creature and it needs water. It could be using it as a route. It could be using it to get food, or it could be something to do with the energy of the water itself, the energy of the land around there, or the fact that all three of those ladies are empathic. So they're used to picking up on energies that are not their own. I don't have the answer, but the common denominator there is we have three ladies, all walking the dogs, close to small rivers, who've seen creatures. So next week, I will share with you some more stories from witnesses who've reached out and contacted me after similar events of their own. Males and females who were suddenly confronted by impossible creatures. And for one poor woman, it was actually in her garden. As I say, we'll hear more about that next week. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me for future episodes. I release content like this every week, and I'm sure I'll cover a topic you enjoy, so don't miss out. Hit that follow or like button. Please check out my YouTube and Patreon memberships for early or exclusive content, and you can find the link to them and my social media and donation sites in one handy link tree below. BBR is not funded, so any donation, no matter how small, is highly appreciated. So I will bid you adieu, and I will be back at the same time, the same day, with more from the BBR Case Files.